Evening, folks. Thanks for coming in. Welcome to the next chapter of Karen's Book Corner. I was going to say instalment, but I think chapter sounds better, don't you? Next chapter of the book, because each chapter's in books. You don't, never mind. Doesn't matter. Anyway, we've got the lovely Shelley as normal, and always Karen Perkins, because let's face it, without Karen, it wouldn't be Karen's Book Corner. It would just be our books, something like that. Who knows? But I'll hand it over to you, Karen, as always, ready to go, and it's all yours now.
Many thanks. Thank you, Scott and Shelley, for having me again. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, whether you're here live or are watching on catch-up. Please, if you have any questions about anything in the writing process, about any of the books, then do pop them in the comments, and we'll do my best to answer them as we go through the hour. And comments are always welcome as well, especially the nice ones. Tonight, so I'm going to do 3 readings tonight. So I'll kick off first with Janet, and we'll then go on to the Night of Betrayal and then Parliament of Rooks. And obviously we'll chat in between as well. But I think it's quite nice just to break the ice with a reading so you can hear what my stories are all about and what my writing's like, and hopefully enjoy a little bit of entertainment as well. All 3 books tonight are ghost stories, which is, of course, completely appropriate for paranormal in history. And Janet is the 3rd book in the Ghosts of Thor's Cross series, after The Haunting of Thor's Cross and Cursed, of course. At the last book corner, I read from the historical timeline. But tonight I'm going to read from the modern day perspective and from Janet's perspective too. So to introduce the reading, a very dry summer means that Thrushcross Reservoir is once again empty and very muddy, and exposing the remains of the village of Thor's Cross, which was drowned beneath the waters back in the 60s. Emma is having nightmares and has heard the church bell, although of course the church is no longer there. It was knocked down when the valley was flooded. Wolf Farm, which is Janet's old home, has new residents, Ruth and Paul Wainwright. Their daughter Claire is the same age as Dave and Emma's daughter Louise, at 4 years old. And playing in the mud, Claire has found a certain small brown ink pot, which incidentally is about the colour of the mud of Thrushcross Reservoir. Emma is certain now Janet is back, and she has an agenda. She wants to bring her children from the spirit world and give them life. And we join them at one of Janet's early attempts to do this. So this is chapter 12. Actually, before I start, guys, there's a bit of feedback. Could you both go on mute for me, please? Thank you. So Emma heard the unmistakable sound of feet climbing the stairs behind her, sat back in her chair with a sigh, then pressed Control and A on her keyboard and delete. She forced a smile onto her face, then turned to help Dave with the rest of the bedtime routine. Mummy, read my story tonight, Louise asserted, waving a hardback book at Emma. Unicorns again, Louise. Aren't you bored of them yet? Like unicorns. Louise led the way into her bedroom. Brush your teeth first. She left the book on her bed with a scowl, then stomped to the bathroom, Emma trailing behind her. Emma and Dave exchanged eye rolls as they followed the usual evening antics in getting both children cleaned and brushed for the night. Why don't you write unicorn books, Mummy? My stories are for grown-ups, and they have pirate ships, no unicorns. You could put bunnies in them, Louise added, trying to help. Pink ones with purple tails. They can even have a boat if you really want one. Might not be a bad idea, Emma muttered to Dave. My pirates are still being very uncooperative. He shrugged. Just keep trying. You know what you're doing. The right words must come sometime. Emma sighed, but said nothing more. Dave did not understand how bereft she felt without the internal chatter of her characters and resultant flow of words onto paper. She shuddered, remembering how intense things had been when she'd written Janet's story. That was 5 years ago now, and she hadn't found her own characters since, whether old friends or new ones. Keep trying, she told herself. I'll find their voices again soon. Janet cannot have stolen those from me too. How many times did she make you read it? Dave asked with a grin as he handed Emma a gin and tonic. She sat down with a sigh and nestled into the sofa cushions before taking a sip. She shivered. It's chilly. Then she addressed Dave's question. I got away after 5. You did well. What's the record stand at now? 9 repeats? I read it 11 times one night last week, Emma admitted. You remember when she had a sniffle and was feeling very sorry for herself? Oh, aye, that was a long night, eh? Emma put a drink down and leaned her head back, eyes closed as she relaxed. Why didn't you tell me about the ink pot? Emma's eyes sprang open at the change of tone. What? Why didn't you tell me that bloody ink pot's resurfaced, and worse, that her daughter were playing with it? Emma looked at him, considering her answer as his voice rose. If you'd listened to me after my nightmare, I would have. But instead, you dismissed me. And I know you, Dave. You stick your head in the sand when there's a problem you don't want to face. Because I didn't know the pot was back. The words exploded out of Dave. You didn't want to know when I told you Janet was back. I didn't think there was any point telling you about the ink pot. Hang on a minute. Are you telling me your nightmare was before you saw the ink pot? Emma nodded. But it turns out that was the day Claire found it. Dave sat back, wiped his face with his hands, then leaned forward, took his drink from the side table and drained it. I'm going to need another one of these, he said. You? Emma shook her head and sipped her own drink. When Dave sat back down, he studied his wife. We deal with this straight away this time, he said, his voice calm. It can't get out of hand again like it did last time. Out of hand, Emma repeated, incredulous at his choice of words. Out of hand? Are you serious? She put her hand to her temple and closed her eyes for a moment, then rubbed her hand on her thigh as she stared at Dave. Well, what would you call it? I'm not going through all that again, you better believe it. You're not going through it again. Believe me, Dave, you had it easy. It was his turn to stare, his mouth twisted in an ugly snarl, and Emma flinched at the disgust she saw in his eyes. She looked away, took another sip of her drink, and wiped her face with a hand. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and expressionless, which Emma found even more disturbing. I never told you this, but I went to see a divorce lawyer that year when it all happened. What? Emma grasped the arm of the sofa and blinked a few times. When I came back, I wasn't really back. Emma stared at him, her face white and perspiration beading on her forehead. She, the lawyer, told me to get our affairs in order, to separate our finances and things as much as possible before I told you. I feel sick, Emma said. But then all that happened up at Wolf Farm and you were in hospital. I couldn't leave you then. And then I got pregnant with Louise. Emma tried to swallow, but her mouth was too dry. She took another sip of gin before continuing. So you only stayed because of Louise? Well, everything else seemed to have sorted itself out. Emma stared at him in shock. You know what I mean, Dave said, realising how callous he sounded. All this time I thought you understood. This explains so much, Emma whispered. All the rows we've been having. I just thought it was the pressure of a family and lack of sleep. Dave said nothing. So now what do we do? Emma squirmed on her seat, her hand on her belly. Well, I'll tell you what we don't do. We don't spend any time with the Wainwrights, and Louise goes nowhere near that ink pot. You want to rip her best friend away from her? I want to protect our children, Dave shouted. Do you think I don't? Emma all but screamed. Oh, God, I'm going to be sick. She got up, swayed, and collapsed back onto the sofa. Dave narrowed his eyes, then took in the pallor of her skin. What's wrong with you? I feel sick, dizzy. Emma glanced around the lounge. Something's wrong. I thought I saw something. It's happening again. Oh, for fuck's sake. Dave jumped to his feet and looked back down at his wife. You didn't say anything. Nothing's here. Just us. Stop the catastrophizing, Emma. She flinched at having the psychotherapy term thrown at her after so long off the antidepressants and counselling sessions. And even if she is here, don't let her in. Simple. And stay away from Ruth and Paul. The emotion drained from Emma and she felt an icy calmness fill her. She took a moment to close her eyes and take a few deep breaths, remembering the meditations she'd done to curb her anxiety in the years after Janet's last attack. Imagining herself surrounded by white light, she opened her eyes and met Dave's stare. If you still blame me, if you still think it was my fault, then I have no use for you. We have no use for you. She remained expressionless as Dave flinched at her words. Janet's already here. The ink pot is already here. Louise is already affected by all this, and I will not destroy her first real friendship because of your fear and denial. Nor will I abandon Ruth and Claire to whatever comes next. Well, don't expect me to hang around and be cuckolded again. And don't think I won't fight for the kids. Emma leaned forward. Good. Fight for them. Help me fight for them. Because I am telling you now, if you don't take this seriously and help me keep them safe, I dread to think what could happen. We have to fight, Janet. And then we can work out how we all move forward and whether you stay or go. Their eyes remained locked for a few moments. Dave shocked that Emma has called his bluff and not asked him to stay. He dropped his eyes and took a step back. I think we've both said too much. I need to calm down. I'll sleep in the spare room and we'll talk again tomorrow. Emma didn't reply, but watched him go upstairs. When he was out of sight, she drained her glass and went to the kitchen to replenish it. Her hand was shaking and the glass clattered as she placed it on the countertop. Her second gin and tonic was a strong one. Chapter 13. Janet. How did she do that? It were easy to get through last time. I walked straight in and she helped me. She wrote the story for me when I couldn't miss in. Why won't she help me now? She of all folk knows what we've done, what's at stake. She knows about Ali and Charlie, and she failed me last time. She owes it to me to help me birth my babbies. And when did she learn to use light? How dare she push me away? Especially after she and the weather worked up all that energy for me to use, giving me strength, power, even phone for a second or two. Why is she so strong now? Reckon it's her kiddies. Being a mum has given her strength. Bitch. Lording that over me when she knows full well what happened to me and my babbies. Wait on though. Happen if she takes strength from her babbies, then I can take strength from having mine close by. And there's another chance here. The woman ain't the only one here I can use to bring Ali and Charlie through. It ain't ideal, but I don't care out for that. There he is, sleeping like a babe. Well, that suits me fine. Don't want him to wake before I'm in. But I can feel my strength waning now, thanks to the yow downstairs. Only one chance to do this. But with luck, one chance is all I'll need. Read then. Gently does it, just like catching a lamb in a field. Don't spook him. Sink slowly down till I'm just above. Now. Down. No, his walk, he sees me. I ain't backing off. Oh no matter how much he's yelling, I'm having him. I reach to grasp his throat, force my way in. Our Father, which art in heaven. No! Hallowed be thy name. I'm weakening, fading. Thy kingdom come, bastard. Thy will be done. Ma'am! I hear the call deep within my being. I know it's me babbies. They're calling me back to form. Aye, I'm in void again, but we're together, and my strength is returning. Ali and Charlie are making me strong again. We ain't done yet. I follow the scents of my little ones. They're pulling me along. They aren't pulling me back. They aren't half good kids. Tough like me, like the man. Aye, I'm the nan and all. The darkness is fading now. I can see where they've brought me. Wolf Farm, of course. Home. That's where I'm strongest. That's where we're all strongest. I need to rest a mite longer. Need to prepare. Ali and Charlie are with me. Together we'll be rebirthed at Wolf Farm. I hope you enjoyed that. Scott and Shelley, are you coming back to join me, please?
Yeah, that was great. And that's more so that chapter there, that was kind of more or less at the beginning of the part, the Janet story. Was that kind of more or less at the beginning?
Yes, because Janet starts off, she's in the void after having been vanquished and gone before. And she's coming back, and she comes back slowly, and she's trying to find a way to come back with more strength, to bring her children with her as well, and to find a way to have form, to have life again after so long. And this was really her first attempt to walk into Emma. So psychic attack, really. So it's the first battle between Janet and Emma, and then she turns to Dave too. So there's been a bit of spooky goings on before, just a bit of bad dreams, the bells tolling, the ink pot resurfacing. But this is the first attack she launches.
And actually, it's the first from Janet's side. You know, you always. I don't want to give too much away because obviously these books are too good to be for me to tell all the story kind of thing. But it is basically from Janet's point of view.
Yes, so you've really got 3 points of view on this one. You've got the historical timeline, which I read on last time, which is Ma Ramsgill, and she has her own battle with Janet in the 1930s. But we have Emma and Dave's, or Emma's point of view in the modern day, in the present day timeline. And then we have Janet's point of view as well, as she's in the void trying to get through. And so she's getting through into the book as well as she is into the story.
Yep, telling her side.
You kind of feel sorry for Emma and her partner because, you know, the way that it's ripped him apart.
Yeah.
You know, it's caused so many problems, and obviously the wee one as well, but you kind of feel sorry the way that it's actually impacted their life, their marriage, you know.
Yeah.
And
they're obviously very different people. She's an author, so she's creative. She's used to channeling, to letting her mind be open, to accept ideas, to explore ideas. And she can accept, she knows what's going on with Janet because she's living it, and she has to come to the conclusion she's either completely mad, or there is this being that has an issue with her and is attacking her. And she realizes that's what's going on, and she fights against it. She tries to defend herself. But her husband Dave is an architect. He's very analytical. As far as he's concerned, there are no ghosts. He reluctantly accepted it in the first book, or did he, or didn't he? And he doesn't want to go there again, and that puts an intolerable pressure on a relationship.
I think it shows how much they actually do, despite, you know, everything's going, how much they actually do love each other, because it's about 5 years since she wrote the book, the 5-year gap. Is that right?
Yes, it is, yes.
Karen, I'm picking up as we're going along. And so for the two of them to endure this for 5 years, it's a long time.
It's been okay for the time in between, for those 5 years, but they've been bringing up a family. They have 2 children. So they have Louise, who's now 4, and they also have Andrew, who's a toddler. I think he's 2. So they've been very busy, but it's always been in the background, and they've never really resolved it between themselves. And as it starts to happen again, the old wounds, they find they're fully healed.
Yeah. Did you think, Karen, sorry, that it was, I mean, obviously you're Janet, you just fell in love with Janet, you know,
I'm sure she
and
will.
but when you were writing through Emma, you know, you were telling the story through Emma, do you feel as invested in Emma's character as you do in Janet's? You know, when you're
I
talking
do,
about all these other
yes.
characters.
Yeah, I think the whole series, all the Thor's Cross books are very dear to my heart because the setting, Thor's Cross Reservoir, is probably my favourite place in the world. It's pretty much where I grew up. I spent every weekend there. At first, running wild on the reservoir edges, building dens, climbing walls, playing in the haunted house, of course.
Yeah.
And having a great time, a wonderful childhood. And as I grew older, then we came onto the reservoir in sailing, and quite often swimming as well. And it is a very spiritual place. I find it's very, very dear to my heart. And Emma is probably the most obviously personal character to me that I've written so far, because she shares that childhood. She shares that childhood at the sailing club, having a wonderful time. She shares my dreams. I mean, she's living in my dream house. Also with a very successful career as an author. I'm still striving towards both of those things. But she also shares my nightmares, because a couple of the nightmares that are in the book are nightmares that I have had as well.
That's a deeply
and I
personal
recently,
portrayal. You know, it's like you're basically portraying a lot of your own life, and just through Emma.
In a way, yes. I mean, once we meet her in Thor's Cross, then it diverges. But yes, an awful lot is. And I might, apologies if I've told you this before, but I recently had a bit of a sort out had my old primary school school books, and I was looking through, and there were the English ones, and there were various essays. And there's a couple of essays in there that have become chapters in The Haunting of Thor's Cross. So there's clearly something that had a massive impact on me at a very young age that has never left me. Oh, good question, Sam. What was your thought when writing these books, as in why that time period? That was actually dictated by the inkpot. Because that was really the inspiration, the catalyst for the books. So I found it as a child clambering over a dry stone wall that had been built into the wall. And that's what really sparked Janet. That's when I had my first experience with Janet, with seeing a figure in the upstairs of the haunted house, in the way that was freakily cover designer Cecilia Morgan captured in the book cover of The Haunting of Thor's Cross. So it had to be, the timing had to be when those walls went up, which was actually a time of great change, because it was the enclosures, it's all that open land was all parcelled off and the walls were built, which was the 1700s. So that's what dictated the time frame for me.
Thank you, Karen.
Shall we move on to...
Go on, Karen. No, I was just going to say, some people are attracted to a certain period in time as well. You know, they're kind of drawn. I know myself, it seems the same. It's, you know, like Tudor times and kind of, Pendle-Witch times as well. I know there's loads of history out there, you know, decade, centuries. But I think sometimes you just get attracted to one kind of time period, and you sort of focus on that, you know. No offence to everything else that's happened, but you kind of, it's a tunnel vision. Just my thoughts. I mean,
I do get fixated on different time periods. I mean, this one was the 17th century, sorry, the 18th century. I think for Parliament of Rooks, I've then gone to the 19th century. Obviously, the Pendle Witch Trials, 17th century, early 17th century. And then for Night of Betrayal, it's the 12th century. So we start this one in 1170. So this is very much the earliest I've gone back. And this one was inspired because I live in Harrogate, which isn't far from Knaresborough. And living here most of my life, going to school here, I never knew that the 4 knights who assassinated the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, then fled from their crime to Knaresborough Castle and hid out here for a year. It's a local history that's kept very quiet. And of course, that intrigued me, and I had to find out more. And I had to find out a lot more about those knights. And this was really the first book I've written where I went in depth in real historical characters. There was an awful lot more research in this, which absolutely fascinated me, and I loved doing it. My thoughts about the whole situation and the motivations, they did change as I went through. Oh, hi, Sandy. Do you think you've had a past life in any of those times? Quite possibly. Quite possibly. I do believe in reincarnation. I believe we do come back over and over. I believe we come back to learn different things for different experiences. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's why I'm drawn to specific time periods. An interesting question.
I agree with that, Karen, actually, as well. I think when you feel connected to like maybe a certain time or like a certain kind of, or a certain person, you just feel like, you know how like we're drawn to the witch trials and stuff like that.
Yes.
I feel that's because in past lives we must have been involved in them at a kind of certain stage.
Yes.
And in one form or another.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, I've been told that as well. Obviously, everybody who watches us and knows us, I've got a great pull towards Greyfriars. I've done many years, can't explain it, but I always need to go.
Yeah.
The group I was in maybe a couple of years ago, I was in another group, and I was the lady says she was a medium, and we're in a discussion one night, and she says the reason you're pulled to Greyfriars is because you had a past life. You were a soldier in Edinburgh.
Right.
I've always enjoyed Edinburgh, you know, the whole old town area. Says you were a soldier, and so I think it was Jeffrey was my name. She says you're actually buried in Greyfriars. Now, whether that's true or not, I've got no idea. No clue. But she says that's why you get such a pull to Greyfriars.
It's an interesting idea, isn't it? And there must be a reason why we feel something, because it really is a deep, visceral, I need to know, I need to explore, it's almost a way of revisiting, isn't it? When we're researching and we're going back there, we're putting ourselves back in that time and thinking about what life was like then. And then to go back over and over.
I know, I'm kind of 50-50 on the reincarnation side, you know, I don't really know much about it, so, but it's possible.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you get stories of children and what have you that, you know, can talk in different languages, or they can tell you, like, they'll get into maybe sort of a relative's house and they'll point to a picture. Exactly. And there's no way.
And they'll track down the families of the past lives, and then when they do meet, they know all the facts, they know all the details, including very personal ones.
That's right.
So there is evidence there. Sam, going back to what Scott said about being drawn to a particular time or place, I'm like that with the Tudors and Stuarts. Yes, we all have. We do get drawn to particular times in history, don't we, and places as well.
Of course.
Anyways, Karen, sorry for interrupting. I know you're going to carry on with your second book, so I'll make us disappear and you can appear again.
Right, so if I hold this up. So, Night of Betrayal, Yorkshire Ghost Story, or a Medieval Haunting is the new subtitle. It's the first time I've read from Night of Betrayal, and I'll be starting almost at the beginning. And to set the scene, the date is 29th of December, 1170, and King Henry II and Thomas Becket are nearing the end of their feud, which has been going on for many years now. Henry allowed Becket back to England from exile, and Becket has responded by excommunicating 3 senior churchmen for their role in crowning Henry's son. Henry has not reacted well and has had a major temper tantrum in Normandy, And this is where the common misquote of "will no one rid me of this turbulent priest" comes from. It's actually a quote from T.S. Eliot's play Murder in the Cathedral. But there was definitely a scene, and there were some very cross words said, and that interpretation is a pretty good one. And 2 men, or 2 knights, Mandeville and Humez, have been dispatched by Henry to arrest Becket. But our 4 knights who feature in here, who are Reginald Fitzurse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, and Richard Lebret, have decided to take matters into their own hands and beat the official delegation to bring Becket to Henry themselves. They've left Normandy for Saltwood Castle, where they are urged on by Sir Ranulph de Broc, and have arrived at Canterbury Cathedral. Divested of their arms and armour, so ostensibly coming in peace, they have banged on the cathedral door, demanding entry. I'm sorry, just my throat needs a little bit of... Okay. So I'm starting at chapter 2, just purely because of the length of time. It would have been too long to go from chapter 1. This is an insult, Fitzurse fumed. He affronts the king by keeping us waiting. I suspect it is the 4 of us he intends to disrespect, Morville countered. Fitzurse glared at him. We are the king's men. He affronts us, he affronts King Henry. The entrance of a monk interrupted the resultant awkward silence. The Archbishop shall see you now. He backed against the open door as the knights passed through. Thomas Becket was still seated at table in the company of near half a dozen men, and Morville recognised John de Salisbury, Benedict de Peterborough, and William de Canterbury. A monk seated at Becket's right hand glared at them, but the knights dismissed him. He was of no consequence. Ah, Hugh, Reginald, William, how good of you to welcome me back to England's fine shores. It has been long that I have been away, and there is no sweeter pleasure than returning home and reuniting with old friends. The knights faltered, unsure of how to proceed in the face of this effusive and seemingly sincere welcome. Then Fitzurse stepped forward. We are not here to welcome you, Becket. The Archbishop's brows rose at this calculated insult. The proper form of address was Your Grace. We are here to return you to Normandy. You have grievously wronged the king. Wronged the king? My lord, what do you mean? What evil and disgusting lies have been told of me? No lies, Becket. Fitzurse's face reddened further under the mass of hair that covered it. Do you deny that you have excommunicated 3 loyal subjects of King Henry, Roger de Pont-l'Evêque, Gilbert Folio, and Jocelyn de Salisbury, the king's most loyal Archbishop of York and 2 of his most loyal bishops? What say you to the charge? Those facts are correct. Pray, what is your complaint? What is my complaint? Fitzurse's voice rose and he stepped forward, then glanced back at his fellow knights who stayed where they were and showed no sign of speaking. He grunted at exasperation. Those 3 honourable, devout and loyal subjects met the king's wishes in crowning his son, Henry the young king, as his successor. As you know, this is normal practice in France and a custom that our king desired to be enacted on England's shores. Yet you bring down the worst punishment on these good, God-fearing men, a punishment worse even than torture and death, for it will condemn their souls to reside in hell for eternity. Fitzurse paused for breath, and Archbishop Becket waved him to continue with a smile. He looked as relaxed as if he were enjoying a much-anticipated reunion with the friends he'd claimed them to be. Fitzurse continued with another aggravated glance at his silent companions. By excommunicating them for the crowning of the young king, you have declared yourself against not only the young king, but King Henry himself. Fitzurse pushed himself to his tallest and thrust out his chest. As such, by the command of King Henry, I arrest you for the good of England and charge you with sedition and treason. Sedition and treason? Surely it must be one or the other, Reginald. Committing treason or inciting others to commit treason. King Henry would know that you cannot charge me with both. which tells me that you and your friends are here on your own recognizance, perhaps to find favour with Henry, Becket stood as he spoke and planted his fists on the table before him, pulling the full force of his position as Archbishop of Canterbury about him. Fitzurse stood his ground, but the others shrank back. Henry also knows that it is the duty of the Archbishop of Canterbury to crown a king, an obligation not given to the Archbishop of York, nor any other man. King Henry accuses you as traitor. You shall come with us. Do I need to remind you that you are my sworn vassal, Reginald? Your good self, Hugh de Morville, and you, William de Tracy, all swore fealty to me. You, he peered at Brett, you have not, although I know you, do I not? Brett ground his teeth, but said naught. No matter. As my sworn vassals, I demand you leave my presence. I shall hear no more of this nonsense. Fitzurse strode forward to Becket's table and planted his own fists upon it. Yes, we swore fealty to you, but as Chancellor of England, not as Archbishop of Canterbury. Yet even so, the fealty sworn was second to King Henry. We, he glanced behind him, disgusted that his fellow knight still hung back. Serve the king above all others, including you. Then tell Henry I have no issue with either himself or the young king. Coronations in England are performed by the Archbishop of Canterbury and no other. Now leave my presence and explain to our king that I am his loyal servant still. The excommunications stand and are an issue between myself, the bishops concerned, Pope Alexander III, and no other. King Henry has my love and fealty, as he has yours. Please try your best to understand that and depart. This has grown tiresome. I bid you good night, my lords. Becket turned, his green robe swirling, and left by a door the knights had not noticed, followed by his clerics. At a loss and alone in the great hall, the four knights turned to depart. Chapter 3. 1 second. Where is he? Brock, standing at the head of a column of men-at-arms, demanded. The knights looked at each other and said naught. Are you telling me that 4 knights of the realm, 4 of the king's own warriors, were no match for one paltry churchman? Fitzurse stepped forward. We offered Becket a chance to come gracefully. He refused. Now we shall take him. Brock glanced at the pile of swords and mail with contempt. You had better dress yourselves then. The knights hurried to the mulberry tree, and Brett hauled up the first heavy hauberk, Fitzurse's. He held the coat of mail wide, heaved it up, and dropped it over Fitzurse's outstretched arms and shoulders. The bear grunted as the weight landed on him, then straightened up and shrugged it over his torso. Mauclark did the same for Morville. Then Tracy and Brett helped each other into theirs. Ready, boys? Brock taunted. Always, my lord, Fitzurse replied, hefting his sword, then strode back to the door of the great hall of the Archbishop's palace. It remained barred to them. Tracy glanced behind at the smirking Brock and called, Round the back, there must be another way in. Without a word or a glance at his master, Fitzurse led the way round the great building to the administration buildings attached to the north side of the cathedral. There, Tracy pointed at a window under repair. The masons have left it incomplete. Up you go then, William, Fitzurse said. Climb in and unlock the door. Tracy glanced at him, then back at the window. His fear of Fitzurse was greater than his fear of heights, however, and he searched the stonework for a path up to the open invitation. Just as he was about to start his climb, Brett called, One moment, William. Tracy turned and smiled when he saw the young knight dragging a ladder. The masons must have thrown it into the shrubbery and fled when they saw the men. Brett nodded at the score of men-at-arms behind Brock. Your lucky day, Brock said. What are you waiting for? Tracy glanced at him, then led the way up to the window, followed by Brett. Morville was the only man to think to hold the ledger steady for them. When both had disappeared through the narrow aperture into the archive building, then made their way downstairs to let the others in, Fitzurse led the way to the chancel door to gain entrance to the cathedral itself, sword drawn. "It's locked," Tracy said. "Then we'll break it down," Fitzurse said. He raised his hand to bang for entry, but the door swung away before his fist connected, causing him to stumble. He glared up at the monk, expecting to see mirth, which he would have sliced off his face in an instant. Instead, he saw fear. "The cathedral is open to all," the monk at the door said in a shaky whisper, blanching at the sight of steel. Fitzurse ignored him and brushed past, searching the gloom of the great cathedral for his quarry. His eyes lit on a huddle of men. "North transept, by the high altar, onward." He strode forward, heartened by the sound of purposeful boots on flagstones behind him. "Becket, traitor, you will come with us by the order of the king." "I am no traitor, Reginald. The traitors here are you and your friends. You are my sworn vassals, yet you dare enter the sanctuary of our Lord with swords drawn." "We are the sworn vassals of the king above all other men." "And what about God? You insult him by entering his house so armed?" "Traitor," Fitzurse accused again, unable to conjure a more ribald riposte. "And what are you?" Becket taunted, pushing past two of his monks who were doing their best to shield him. "A procurer. And I see the Lord Brock, the king's most senior whoremaster, is here too. Good afternoon, Sir Ranulph. Has the king really sent his pimps to procure an archbishop rather than whores? He must think highly of you after all." Fitzurse roared with rage and rushed forward, his impetus enough to carry Morville, Tracy and Brett in his wake. "Reginald, are you mad?" Becket's voice at last betrayed fear, but it only drove the knights on and broke the paralysed terror of Becket's men as half of them fled. Now it was 4 against 4, although the knights had an army at their backs. The clerics had naught but an altar. Fitzurse and Brett grabbed the priest. "Tracy, bend over," Fitzurse ordered. At Tracy's bewildered look, he explained further. "We shall get him on your back, then carry him outside." "No!" Becket lunged at the nearby pillar, clutching it to his bosom as if his life depended on it. Fitzurse burst into bellows of laughter as Brett tried to pull the archbishop's grip from the pillar, and Tracy attempted to heave the man away. Morville stood, sword raised to keep those clerics who had stayed under guard, whilst Brock and his men stood back, seemingly viewing the proceedings as a mummers show. Fitzurse flicked out his sword and caught the archbishop's fur cap, which he flung towards the altar, then smacked the holy man's rump with the flat of his blade. Becket roared in outrage, and Tracy gave up the tug-of-war, dumping the archbishop in an ungainly heap on the floor. "Sire," one of the monks, grim, cried out, and escaped Morville to rush to his master's side. Becket jumped to his feet, his face red, and confronted Fitzurse. "You have gone mad, Reginald. You have lost what few wits you were born with. This is no way to treat any man, especially in God's house, never mind me. You swore fealty to me, yet you make a mockery, not only of yourselves, but of our Lord, and his sanctuary. Leave this place, do not return." In reply, Fitzurse took hold of the archbishop's cloak and pulled the man closer. Before he could speak, however, Becket spat in his face. "Unhand me, pander. You are not worthy to touch this cloth." "By God, men, if you do not shut him up, I shall rip the very head from his body," Fitzurse roared. He let go his hold of the holy cloth and stood back to give himself room to swing his sword. Becket bent forwards, clasping his hands before his face in prayer, beseeching God to be ready to welcome him through the gates of heaven. Tracy lunged before Fitzurse finished his backswing. The monk, grim, raised his arm to protect his master, but Tracy did not flinch. His blade glanced off the top of the Archbishop's head, sliced a deep gouge through Grim's upper arm, and parted the flesh of Beckett's shoulder until he struck bone. Grim screamed in agony, yet Beckett barely paused in his prayers. Into thy care, Lord, I commend my spirit. He sank to his knees as the blood flowing from his wounds weakened him. Tracy struck at his head once more, screaming as he swung his blade, and the priest fell. Tracy rested on his sword, the effort of such a heavy swing winding him, and Brett stepped forward. Shrieking in rage, he thrust his blade at Beckett, slicing the crown of his head clean away. Sparks flew, momentarily gracing Beckett with a halo as the steel blade shattered. That's for William, my friend, the king's brother. He died of a broken heart when you refused his marriage. Now you have paid the price for his suffering, Brett shouted. Grim fell over his master, weeping, and Hugh Mauclark, Morville's clerk, stepped forward. With the tip of his sword, he scraped the pinkish-white brain matter from the holy skull and smeared it over the bloody flags. That's one pesky priest who shall give no further trouble. Morville grabbed him, horrified at the callousness of his man, a man who had played no part in the actual deed. Hurry, we must depart. The knights turned to leave, but paused at the glare of Brock and the horrified faces of the men who stood with him. What have you done? Brock said. We have cured the king of his priestly troubles, Fitzurse said, and you stood by and watched. Brock gritted his teeth in thought, then said, Go, back to Saltwood Castle. Take your belongings and ride north. Scotland may be safe for you. And you? Morville inquired. Me? I shall go to the king and plead your case. A man burst into the cathedral and hurried to his master. He hesitated at the sight before his altar, then whispered into Brock's ear. Mandeville and Humez have beached. Hurry, you must leave. And that's Night of Betrayal. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Gosh, my throat.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. It's a lot of reading for you to do.
Thank you.
Hope that's in that glass.
That was brilliant, very drawn in. I don't know what happened to the screen, but halfway through it, just my camera went off, and then the threes popped up, and so that wasn't me. But it did. You carried on. I really, really enjoyed that. It sounded to me. Sorry. To me, they went hoping to bully this guy, in the name of the king, and it didn't work the way they wanted it. Yeah. They didn't expect him to be so feisty.
Yeah. The king had sent 2 men to arrest Beckett, and these 4, after a fair bit of wine, thought, no, we'll get there first. They were fairly lowly lights, as mentioned in there. Fitzurse was the one who procured women for the king. And they thought it was a good chance to gain favour with King Henry. So they beat the official party, and they got to Saltwood Castle, had a lot more wine, and then made their way to Canterbury Cathedral, and everything that was in there, the actions, the way they got in, the way Beckett received them and then sent them away, that is all in the historical record. And I think that they couldn't cope with being shot down, with being refused. They couldn't cope with the loss of face of going there to arrest Beckett and not coming away with him. They were full of knights, and he was a churchman. And certainly at this point, they fully believed they were doing King Henry's bidding, and doing exactly what he wanted.
And that was just the beginning of the story. And
Yes.
obviously, I know how much work. Well, I can only imagine how much work you've put into that, Karen. How long did it actually take you from start to finish to write that book? Because it is quite a large book as well, and
Yeah.
so many historical facts.
Yeah, it probably took a good year to research and then a year to write and edit. And it was really fascinating because I had to look at the local landscape completely differently and just say, actually, what was there in the 12th century? So what actually existed, and actually it was very little. I was driving around all the country lanes looking for churches and big houses. I knew on the map what was there at the time and where they were, but then I had to go so that I could get in my own head the landscape and exactly where they were and how far away from each other they all were as well. Because at this point they do head north, and then this is where they then go to Knaresborough Castle. Because one of the knights, Hugh de Morville, is the custodian of the castle through marriage. So that is his domain. The north is not very populated at all. Most is concentrated down in the south, and an awful lot of King Henry's time split between England and Normandy. So even though he's the King of England, he's not actually in England very often. So it's a very different place.
A lot of people would imagine that when you're writing a book, a lot of the kind of stuff just comes from your own head. But, like, for example, the Night of Betrayal, and obviously the Parliament and Rooks as well, with all your books, but because there's so many historical facts in the Night of Betrayal,
yes,
what you're saying is it's basically a full-time job, because you're travelling around trying to find out exactly what lay in these areas and who were these people, what the dialect was.
Yes,
And
but actually
what
the
happened
dialect is interesting because English didn't exist at this point, so they would actually have spoken Norman French. So it's trying to get the sense of who they were, the sense of what they would have said in a way that we can understand it, and that makes sense to us in the context of that time. But yes, it was very interesting to have these 4 nights take shape in my head.
Yeah.
Because it was quite a challenge because there's a lot of characters. So there's the 4 knights plus all the periphery characters. But then there's the present day as well, and there's the equivalent of the 4 knights. And in the present day timeline on this one, it is it's a theatre company who are putting on a play entitled Night of Betrayal. So about all the events that take place here. So between the two, we find out a lot of the history of what actually happened, and also the characters as well, of the characters of the knights and who they were. And very little is really known about them. So it was a real search to pinpoint who they were and get as much information as I possibly could about them. But it was quite fun with this one because the modern characters are a theatre company, so it's quite dramatic. A lot of the speech is quite dramatic.
Yeah.
I quite enjoy that. And I quite enjoy reading it aloud as well because I get to put my thespian head on. Although I didn't quite anticipate how much all the different voices would do, what that would do to my throat.
I really enjoy it. You're sitting there, obviously you were in the full screen, but I was sitting there listening, and you can see it in your head. What a film playing in your head. You can see these guys, the knight standing there, and then you get this other guy who's short. You get this image of him in your head. He's just short, and he's like that. There's no way you're taking me. So you can picture it in your head, the scene, and then they tail between their legs, and they think, no, we're not having this. We're getting back, and and you can imagine all in your head them getting back to we're getting this guy, and this wee guy standing there like that. You're no way you taking me. And actually, I really enjoyed it.
And actually, Scott, that is actually just the beginning of the book. So there's so much more. When you consider the size of that book, there is so much more. And obviously, you kind of just read it all on the page. But
thank you, Sandy.
And actually see when you listen to yourself talking about how much effort it took to actually write research, then write, then edit it, it helps people enjoy it even more because they understand how much you've worked to get it to where it to publish it, really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dawn and Cherry. Those lovely comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But yes, it does take an awful lot, especially with, well, not especially because all books take an awful lot of research, but with historical books, especially when they are true historical events, there is so much research because it has, although I'm weaving a fictional tale, it has to fit in with what the historical record says, with what is actually. Then I've put the book on the floor, Dawn. I think it's about 80,000 words. So it's not massive. So I'd say it's around 300, 350 pages. I'm sorry, Dawn. I've put the book on the floor and I can't reach it again now to double check. So it's not massive. It's proper novel size.
And
I think it's in relation to the Pendle Witches as short stories.
Yeah. I think the dual timelines as well help to relate. Like for the modern person to read your books, it helps them to relate better to the kind of the years gone by, especially with the Night of Betrayal. It really helps with the dual timelines. So for somebody younger than us, maybe in their 20s or late teens, if they wanted to read their books, it would they could relate more with the modern timeline, and then understand to come back years gone by. I think that really works.
I do like the dual timeline because it gives two different perspectives on the same events. So you get to look at things in different ways because things aren't always clear cut. But a lot of history is just his story, is what was written down at the time. And then it's people's interpretations of what was written down at the time.
Yeah.
And each one of those interpretations has different perspectives. So try and pick all those together, try and find what I think is the most plausible one. And then also look at that from a different way as well, just to really examine it and push it and make sure it really is plausible. And I think that's what the two timelines do for me. And I do wonder, because I'm a Gemini, and I do wonder if there is a part of the dual aspect going on there, which is
the balancing.
A balance, yes, the past and the present, and of course the past, it does form the present. What's gone before has to what happens now, so that it's all relevant together, irrelevant.
You're right there, Karen. History has a habit of repeating itself, so it's good to have that kind of bridge between the past and the present.
Yes.
Bringing past the present. Right. I had to plug that there. Bring the past to the present. Well, that's us nearly at the hour mark, Karen, so it's now up to you if you want to go for your next or leave it to your next chapter.
Thank you, Scott. There is one last reading. It is shorter though, so it shouldn't overrun by too much. And this one is from Parliament of Rooks, Haunting Bronte Country, which is this one here. So I've got the large print edition here, and I mean, don't need any encouragement to visit Bronte Country. And in this chapter, we go into the moors above Haworth. It's another dual timeline novel set in modern day and the 19th century, and does feature the Bronte family, predominantly Emily. So the main character of the modern day timeline, Verity, has bought a property within sight of the parsonage, the Bronte's home, and has started having strange experiences and dreams, featuring the Brontes and a young boy and later man named Harry Sutcliffe. And this reading is from one of those dreams. And this is chapter 19. What have you found, Emily? Branwell called from further down the hill. Don't go too far away. You know, Papa said I'm in charge and I'm staying over here with Anne. Emily gave no sign of hearing her brother and crouched motionless in the heather over the treasure she'd found. Can you hear them? She asked. Only a little bit. How did you know I was here? Harry asked. Emily looked at his wooden-soled clogs, and he understood. I ran away from mill again, he confided. Emily made no reply. Harry watched her, intrigued as she studied the lapwing nest of chicks. She didn't speak to him very much, but he didn't take offence. She didn't speak to anybody very much, except to brothers and sisters, and then only when she had a mind to. He liked her silence. His world was normally filled with noise. The spinning machines at the mill, the constant clack of the hand looms in the weaver's gallery, which took up the entire top floor of the row of cottages where he and his family had their home. The clop of horses, rumble of wagon wheels, and shouts of draymen on the street. And of course the little one's cries and Ma's sobs at home. He lived with his 8 brothers and sisters, 7 now. The baby had died before even earning a name, and someone was always sickly. It was Mary and Robert at the moment, keeping everyone's nerves on edge with their constant coughing and crying. As if on cue, Harry himself coughed, feeling the tickle of the fluff from the spinning room within his throat. Hush! Emily rounded on him, her little face fierce. You'll scare them. Sorry, Harry whispered. Can I see? Emily regarded him with large round eyes, considering whether he was worthy of the sight, then nodded and moved aside. Harry took her place, then gasped as the dull grey drizzle that had offered no respite for over a week turned to a sudden drenching downpour. The sky turned so black it seemed almost night, high on the moor above Haworth, despite it yet being early afternoon. Harry regained his composure and bearing in the violently changed conditions, then lost them again as he saw Emily Bronte twirling in the heavy rain, arms outstretched and face turned to the sky. Emily, Emily, come on, we have to find shelter or we'll catch our deaths, Branwell called, to no avail. Branwell's small face, turned up towards them, was serious and worried, but he had Anne to take care of, and the 7-year-old took his duty very seriously. Besides, he knew just how stubborn Emily could be. Emily! Harry saw him scream. Saw because nothing could be heard over the enormous, thunderous roar that exploded around them. Lightning flickered, followed by a lesser thunder. Something wasn't right. Harry looked uphill and his mouth dropped open in shock. It was moving. The hillside was moving. Pete, Heather and Rock slid towards the children. Emily! Harry shouted and ran to grab her. She had seen the danger, but instead of running for safety, she was trying to gather the lapwing nest with its brood of chicks into her hands. Harry pulled at her, but she resisted, and he had no choice but to pick up the child, thankfully still small and thin for even her young age, and run, stumbling out of the path of the relentless tumbling moorside. The 4 children, Emily still clutching the lapwing chicks, hurried along a path that would take them out of danger and also bring them back together, Branwell dragging a screaming 5-year-old Anne alongside him, and Harry still carrying Emily. He put her down, his arms shaking, and she barely looked at him, her attention still wholly occupied by the birds. Did she not understand the danger she had been in herself? Emily! Branwell sank to his knees when he reached his sister, and he and Anne clung to her. It's all well. I think so, Emily said, holding out the nest. I don't know how the parents will find them, though. They'd better come home with us. Branwell and Harry looked at the way home. It was a river of gloopy, rocky mud. How will we get home? Anne asked, her voice small and terrified. Branwell didn't answer, but looked at Harry. We'll have to go round, Harry said. No, Branwell said. We'd have to go right round by Top Withens. That's too far, especially in the rain and with Anne. Pondon Hall is much closer. We'll go there and the Heatons can get a message to Papa. He shall come to fetch us. Whoever heard of an earthquake in Haworth? The parson said, when he arrived, having ascertained those of his children not yet in the custody of a school were all present and unharmed. He stared at the lapwing nest, still protected in Emily's hands, then glared at Harry. Mam says it were the bog that burst, Robert Heaton said. Nonsense, did you not hear it? It was an earthquake. The parson dismissed him and his mother. Now, who is this? Harry stayed silent, scared of the stern cleric who thundered from the pulpit every Sunday. A tall figure, dressed in black with high white collar, Harry had always been scared of him. Harry Sutcliffe, Emily said. He works at the mill but keeps running away. Does he now? You know you'll be beaten for that, boy. Harry nodded. Yes, sir. He saved Emily, Papa, Branwell said, unhappy at being left out of the conversation. I was with Anne, looking after her like you told me to, Papa, and Emily was up the hill with her lapwings. I told her to come, but she didn't, Papa, and then Harry came, just before the big roar, and Emily was dancing in the rain, and she wouldn't come, and she saved the lapwings, and Harry picked her up and ran away from the bogslide. Branwell stopped, out of breath. His father regarded him in silence a moment, no doubt making sense of his son's rushed monologue. I see. Well, young Harry, it appears I and my family owe you a great debt. Harry looked up at him in hope. Mrs. Heaton had fed them all pork and apple with hot posset when they'd arrived, soaked to the skin and shivering. Dare he ask for more food to take home for his family? You work at the mill, boy? Yes, sir. Which one? Rook's, sir. And you do not like the work? No, sir. But is it not good to have work so your family have food and shelter and cloth on their backs? Yes, sir. Then why do you run away? It is so loud, sir. I can't hear the lapwings call, and I cough all the time. And my brothers and sisters cough all the time, and I keep getting hurt. He held out an arm showing thick red wheals on the pale skin, and enough. Patrick Bronte held up a hand. I have heard enough. He glanced at Emily. Do you miss the lapwing's call, Harry? Yes, sir. Well, I cannot find you work with birds, the parson said, and Mrs. Heaton tittered. But the mason is looking for an apprentice. There is just too much work for him these days. He lapsed into a thoughtful silence, then blinked. It is hard work, but skilled work, and would give you a trade. Would you like that, boy? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Very well. Report to the mason's workshop behind the parsonage first thing tomorrow morning. I shall inform your father and Mr. Rook. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, Harry said again, so overjoyed at not having to return to the mill. He had not yet considered that he would be carving memorials for the remainder of his life. What about me, Papa? Branwell asked, a little sulkily. I looked after Anne and saved her. I dragged her away out of the danger, didn't I, Anne? Didn't I? Anne nodded. She had not spoken since reaching safety. I should expect nothing less from you, Branwell. It is your duty to care for your sisters. At Branwell's crestfallen face, his papa ruffled his hair. Now, let's get you all home, Tabby and Aunt Branwell are very worried about you all and are making an extra special supper for us all tonight, liver and onions. And you have earned a double helping, Branwell. What do you think of that? That will do very well, Papa, thank you, Branwell said, and beamed at his father. It was his favourite. So I hope you enjoyed that little snippet of life in Haworth. And that is based on a real event of a bogslide nearly catching a group of children who are suspected to be the Bronte children, but it's not known for sure. It must have been terrifying for the whole hillside to just slide down and just.
So I never knew that was actually a real event.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a really heartwarming story.
It's just the way you write your books, you know, the way you tell the story as well. You just sit and listen. I like to liver and onions, but I'm a big fan of liver. I like that, but I like the story. You know, don't get me. I didn't like the story, but I did the liver and onions. I thought, you know, could do.
He was born in
I
1920.
remember my nan who was born in 1920. She told me that when she was young, she worked in the mills. She actually lost a finger when she told me when I asked. Wonder if it was a cotton mill in the northwest. it could well be, because those mills, they were wool, they were worsted wool, and then later on they became cotton mills as that came, and the loss of fingers, loss of limbs,
Right.
loss of life in those mills was horrendous.
Children's lives as well.
Children's lives, so tiny children scrabbling around underneath this massive machinery, no safety procedures whatever, and long hours as well, so very tired, and a moment's inattention and that was it, they were crushed. Oh, bless
They really
you,
did highlight that book. It did highlight a lot of the issues that they had to live with the diseases and the hunger and the poor living conditions, and obviously the working conditions as well. It really did highlight a lot of that. But it's a very heartwarming story.
Yeah, and I mean, again, with this dual timeline, with this, because life was so harsh in Haworth at that time, and it was the mills. There was diseases like TB, scarlet fever, diphtheria, also, which all passed on with living in close conditions, which they did in the mill cottages at that time, plus terrible water sanitation as well. And the loss of life and life expectancy was horrendous in that village. It was a real hotspot for death, if I say that, which is awful. I didn't realise how bad it was. And I think with the dual two timelines in that one, I was able to highlight the difference between life in Haworth then, just how grim and hard it was to survive, and then life in Haworth now, which can be, it's more touristy, it's more relaxed, and also just the culture can be a bit frivolous. It's just, oh, let's get together, let's have a bottle of wine, and bye-bye, see you next time, we'll do it all over again. And it's a very stark contrast in how life has changed in 150 years. But I mean, don't let me put you off. It is a fantastic village. I've actually got my trip booked, fantastic, for next month. So I'm spending a week there. I can't wait. And it really is a fabulous place to visit if you can. Yeah.
We will make it. We will make it down there.
Be paying it a visit.
Yes.
We will make it down there. Maybe included Pendle trip. I just don't.
Yes. This would be perfect to include with a Pendle trip, because it's just over the moors. I heard wine.
I had to put that up.
We'll do that, Sandy, sometime.
I think Sandy's a wine fan, then she's a fan of the vino. Not a bad thing.
Absolutely on my wavelength most of the time, except when we're not.
So you like the Tippo as well, Karen?
I have been known once or twice when I relax.
Once or twice.
Wonderful quote by Ernest Hemingway, which I try not to take the first part too much to heart, honest, but it's right drunk and edit sober. The second part, absolutely, definitely. But actually having a glass of wine, it does help the imagination to fly, I have to admit. But then when I'm in the zone, I forget to drink the wine. So it all works out.
It's the balance again, Karen. It's the balance.
All right. Sorry, Shelley.
It's that balance again we're talking about.
It is, yes. Always in search of a balance. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say when you're in the zone, you forget to stop drinking the wine. You forget to, I thought you were going to say the other thing, you forget to.
No, it's the other way around. I forget to pick up. Actually, when writing that book, because Emily Bronte is rumoured to haunt the guest house that Verity buys, and it was the guest house that I was staying in at the time. At the time, it was called Wilson's. It has changed hands. I think it's now called Weaver's. And she has been seen a few times over the years. So I did a little ghost hunt of my own. So it was bed and breakfast, and they were very happy for me just to sit. Oh, all right, so I like that one. I remember that, Sandy.
Me too.
And I was sitting waiting to see if Emily Bronte would appear, because it's around about the 19th of December, which is her birthday, that she tends to appear. And she does, and that ghost, that haunting, does appear in the book. And I sat.
What was that date again, Karen? Sorry.
Around about the 19th of December.
Oh.
And I just sat and I waited just to see if I could do anything. And I thought, well, if she comes, it'll be later. So I'll just start writing. I got completely into the zone. And I only realised, you know, when you have a delayed reaction, I realised that there'd been a noise behind me about 10 minutes ago. And I think the owner had come out and moved a chair just to give me a fright. I was so in the zone writing, I didn't even notice. So literally, Emily Bronte could have paraded in front of me, walked up the imaginary steps, and I could have just missed her because I was writing about her instead.
Oh, blissfully unaware.
So first rule of a ghost hunt, pay attention.
Exactly. Very, very, very important. So I think we'll wind it up there, ladies. Karen, absolutely amazing. As all, also your books are available online and what have you.
They are in the Paranormal in History shop.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. Yep.
That's all good retailers. Yeah, and they're in paperback, audiobook, some of which are narrated by myself as well, if you do like my readings, and Kindle. And they've also now gone wide onto all other e-readers as well. So Kobo, Apple Books, Nook, all of them. So you should be able to find them pretty easily, hopefully.
Everywhere.
Can't.
Everywhere. So thank you again very much, Karen and Shelley. You'll be seeing Karen on the 25th.
Yes. So on my next event, I'll be joining you for our Witchcraft Special with Patty Negri, the renowned Hollywood psychic medium and good witch. I'll get a bit starstruck. So yes, on the 25th of June at 8 p.m. That's right, isn't it? And join us if you can. It promises to be a fascinating evening. It really does.
Yeah.
Well, we're going as Karen says, Patty's coming back in to do our talk about witchy stuff or whatever. She's going to do something. It's not fun having Patty. I won't be saying much again because one, it won't be my live, and two, Patty can never understand what I'm saying anyway. There's a kind of language block there, I always have to slow right down when I'm talking to her. Bless her. She's a lovely lady, very down to earth, very, and she knows her stuff. So that'll be good. But what, Bill?
I'm saying just
Can't hear what she's saying.
Oh, it's frozen.
Glitching. But we're back tomorrow night. Sorry, Shelley, I totally missed that. You froze. What did you say? And she froze again.
Can they hear what I'm saying?
This isn't working, is it?
So as soon as we mentioned witchcraft, it started glitching.
There's just something there. Oh, witchcraft. But Patty's lovely. It's always a pleasure to have her on. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can hear you now.
Good night.
So thanks again, Karen and Shelley and everybody for watching. We're back tomorrow night, 9 o'clock with Parapole. She's on the line already. I think she is, Sandy, by the looks of her eyes. They're starting to get that wee kind of glazed look, We're on tomorrow night with Parapole, and then we've got a double investigation outside. We got Saturday night, we got a double investigation, and a couple of members of the English team are coming up to join us, so it should be a good night, hopefully. So until we see you again, take care, everybody, and thanks very much for coming in, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.